Listen, we are just days away from the winter meetings in Florida, and the rumor mill is absolutely churning right now. We've got some massive updates coming from Ken Rosenthal and Jeff Passan, two of the most connected reporters in baseball. And I need to break all of this down for you because there are some serious implications for what the Phillies might do this offseason. So stick around because we're going to talk about Kyle Schwarber's market, a potential outfield target that just came out of nowhere, and why one of the names that Phillies fans have been obsessing over for months is now basically off the table. Let's jump right into this. Ken Rosenthal just dropped a report about an hour ago in The Athletic, and it's going to disappoint a lot of people who've been hoping the Phillies would make a big splash for an outfielder. According to Rosenthal, the Minnesota Twins are not planning to trade Byron Buxton. They're also holding on to their top starting pitchers, Joe Ryan and Pablo Lopez. For anyone who's been following the Phillies rumor mill this offseason, Buxton's name has been floating around constantly as a potential right-handed bat the team could target. He fits the profile of what they need. He's got power. He plays excellent defense, and acquiring him would have addressed a major hole in this lineup, but now it looks like that door is closed. Rosenthal says the Twins are planning to keep these guys and actually try to compete in the American League Central next season. Now, if you know anything about the Twins organization, you know they've been in this weird limbo for months. They sold off a ton of talent at the trade deadline last year, including closer Juan Duran, who came to the Phillies, and there's been a ton of speculation about their financial situation. Apparently, the ownership group has about $425 million in debt, which is absolutely wild. They brought in some minority ownership groups over the summer specifically to help pay that down. So money is clearly tight over there. But Rosenthal is reporting that despite those financial issues, the Twins don't want to alienate their fan base any further by trading away their best players. They think they can compete in what's honestly one of the weaker divisions in baseball, and they just hired a new manager in Derek Shelton, so they're trying to project optimism heading into next season. They apparently have some flexibility to make additions, specifically in the bullpen after they gutted that at the deadline, and maybe a first baseman. But the bottom line here is that Byron Buxton is staying in Minnesota. If you were holding out hope that the Phillies were going to swing a trade for him, you can probably let that go now. Unless something absolutely crazy happens and the Twins get an offer they can't refuse, Buxton's not going anywhere. So with Buxton off the board, where does that leave the Phillies in their search for outfield help? Well, this is where things get interesting. Jeff Passan put out a massive article this morning with Buster Olney, and there's a lot to unpack here. The first big thing is about Kyle Schwarber. Passan's reporting that multiple teams across baseball are basically waiting for Schwarber to sign before they make their next moves. He lists Philadelphia, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Boston, Baltimore, and even the Mets as teams whose offseason plans are tied to where Schwarber ends up. The belief around the league is that it's going to take a 5-year deal to lock him up. He's 32 years old, so giving him that kind of commitment is a real decision for any team. But once Schwarber signs, that's when Passan thinks the market is going to break open and other dominoes will start to fall. Now, if you've been watching this team for the last few years, you know how important Kyle Schwarber is to this lineup. He's the leadoff guy. He sets the tone. He gets on base. He hits for power. And he's a huge clubhouse presence. I've said it multiple times in previous videos. I just don't see a realistic scenario where Schwarber leaves Philadelphia. Yeah, there are other teams interested. The Red Sox make sense because he played in Boston before. The Reds could use a veteran bat. The Pirates are trying to add pieces. But when you look at everything the Phillies have going for them, the competitive window, the relationship Schwarber has with this team and this city, and the fact that Dave Dombrowski has made it clear that bringing back Schwarber and JT Realmuto are the top priorities, I think he's coming back. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm being a homer here. But all the smoke feels like it's pointing toward a reunion. Here's where it gets even more interesting. In that same article, Passan mentions that the Phillies, along with the Yankees and Mets, have interest in Cody Bellinger. This is the first time we've heard Bellinger's name seriously connected to the Phillies this offseason, and it's a fascinating development. Bellinger just came off a solid year with the Cubs where he hit 29 home runs, drove in 98, and put up a 125 OPS plus. He's a former MVP. He's a switch hitter, which gives you lineup flexibility, and he can play both center field and first base. For a Phillies team that's been desperate to add right-handed power to balance out a lefty-heavy lineup, Bellinger doesn't necessarily fit that mold since he hits from the left side, but he's a proven veteran who's been to the postseason. He's performed on big stages, and he'd be an upgrade over a lot of the question marks the Phillies have in the outfield right now. Let's talk about the outfield situation for a second, because it's a legitimate concern. If Nick Castellanos gets moved, which feels like the safest assumption at this point, you're looking at Brandon Marsh, Weston Wilson, and potentially Justin Crawford as your outfield mix. Marsh is great defensively and has value, but you don't necessarily want him playing every single day. Wilson is a solid bench piece, but he's not an everyday starter. And Crawford, as exciting as he is as a prospect, hasn't proven anything at the big league level yet. Harrison Bader is a free agent and could come back, but even if he does, that's still not a complete outfield. So adding someone like Bellinger makes sense from a depth and talent perspective. The question is whether the Phillies can afford to bring back Schwarber, Realmuto, and Bellinger all in the same offseason. That's a lot of money to commit, and we know this front office is up against some payroll limitations. But if they're serious about competing, and if they really believe this is their window, then maybe they find a way to make it work. Now, here's my take on Bellinger. I think this is a pivot option. If for some reason Schwarber walks and signs somewhere else, then Bellinger becomes a really attractive fallback plan. He gives you a veteran outfielder who can hit, who's been in big moments, and who wouldn't completely break the bank on a contract. But if Schwarber comes back, which again I think is the most likely outcome, then I'm not sure how Bellinger fits unless the Phillies are planning to move Castellanos and really shake up the roster construction. It's definitely something to monitor as we get closer to the winter meetings. The other thing Passan mentioned is that once Schwarber signs, we could see movement on second-tier free agents like Jorge Polanco, JT Realmuto, and Japanese infielder Kazuma Okamoto. He also said there's buzz around Japanese right-hander Tatsuya Emi potentially landing with a big market team on the East Coast, with the Yankees, Mets, and Phillies all mentioned as possible fits. That's interesting because the Phillies definitely need pitching depth, especially with questions about how much they can rely on Taijuan Walker and whether they make any other moves in the rotation. So where does this leave us? Byron Buxton is almost certainly staying in Minnesota, which eliminates one of the top right-handed outfield bats the Phillies could have targeted. Kyle Schwarber's free agency is the linchpin for the entire market, and once he signs, everything else is going to start moving. The Phillies have interest in Cody Bellinger, which could be a fallback if Schwarber leaves, or a depth addition if they decide to spend big. And we're just a few days away from the winter meetings where all of this could come to a head. I know some of you are probably tired of hearing about rumors and speculation, but this is the reality of the offseason. Nothing concrete has happened yet, but these reports matter because they give us insight into what teams are thinking and what moves might be coming. The Phillies are clearly being aggressive in exploring their options, and that's what you want to see from a team that's trying to win now, whether it's Schwarber, Bellinger, Realmuto, or someone else entirely. This front office is working the phones and trying to put together the best possible roster for next season. We'll see how it all shakes out, but the next week or two is going to be absolutely critical. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any updates as this all unfolds.